move now into another dimension with Professor Elaine Scarry from Harvard, author of Nuclear Monarchy.
Thermonuclear monarchy.
Thermonuclear Monarchy. We haven't been pushing the books, but all our speakers are important books.
So there's a quotation that I very much like from Gandhi that says, you can wake a man who's asleep, but you can't wake a man who's pretending to be asleep. And I don't know whether the American population is actually asleep or pretending to be asleep, but it is very hard to get people aware of this. And I think that Alan Roebuck's work on nuclear winter, showing that if only 1/100th of 1% of the current arsenal is used, billions of people will die within the first month, has done a great deal to wake people up. Whoever actually looks at his research does begin to see the problem. We know from Hiroshima and Nagasaki that what the devastating physical effects are of even a small atomic weapon, and the Physicians for Social Responsibility and Alan Roebuck and his colleagues working on nuclear winter make it very clear that millions of people in the world, as well as millions of birds and animals and plants, will be devastated if there should be even a small exchange of nuclear weapons. And my work is trying to show that in addition to this incredible physical injury, there's also a profound civic injury that has occurred by the existence of nuclear weapons. Alan showed you the graph for 2014. This is the graph for 2015. It's almost the same. There's a tiny number of scheduled to be retired weapons that have been retired, but there are also ominous things coming up. China, for the first time, has an accomplished SSB, a nuclear submarine force, that's now on the graph for the first time. And as he said, close to 94% of the weapons are owned by Russia, which is everything from the blackout on your left-hand side, and the United States, which is everything from the blackout on the right-hand side. And we know that this has put the Earth in peril, as the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists has said for the last 2 years, where we've now got a 3-minute warning in which we can act and still have blue sky. The civic injury comes about from what is obvious from what Ira and Alan have just said. There is no way to protect yourself against this arsenal. So it has eliminated from all human beings on Earth the right of self-defense. This may seem like a small point, but the right of self-defense is a right underlying every other right that we have. And the right of self-defense is also at the foundation of the human capacity for governance. I should say here that in addition to eliminating the right of self-defense, it's eliminated, as Ira's talk made clear, has eliminated our capacity for mutual aid. There is no way to help each other if there are only 94 beds in a terrain that will include tens of thousands of burn injuries. Now, given the incredible physical impact of these weapons, why would we even stop to talk about the fact to say, P.S., it's destroyed governance? I think there are 3 reasons why it's crucial to hold on to this. First is that this isn't an additional effect. It's what we're looking at. When we look at this gigantic architecture that has no purpose other than annihilation, that is, that architecture of state weaponry does not exist for some other purpose that incidentally entails the possibility of annihilation. It exists in order to bring about that harm. That has been brought about by jettisoning various governmental components that, had they been followed, would have made nuclear weapons impossible. And I'll try, in the short time I have, to begin to show you how that's true. Second of all, even if it were possible that we didn't have an exchange of nuclear weapons or a single use of nuclear weapons, and that's nearly impossible, as earlier speakers today have said, and as Max continually points out, the chances that this isn't going to happen are, close to 0, possibly 0. But even if it didn't happen, the desecration to civic society is already happening and is happening right now. The fact that people don't have any voice, don't have any right of self-defense, aren't seen as having the stature that would let them address the problem of their own defense is a terrible thing. And then third of all, and for us, I think in this room, this is most important, understanding that governance provides the tools for dismantling the nuclear arsenal is crucial, just because it's among the things we have at our disposal for undoing the current situation that we have. The various constitutional, national, and international legal instruments had to be put aside in order to have nuclear weapons, because you can't have nuclear weapons and be following these laws. So we just jettisoned the laws. But if we bring back those laws, we can only bring them back by jettisoning the nuclear weapons. And so the fact that the two are mutually exclusive is a very important detail of them. The fact that the human beings on Earth have lost the right of self-defense is shown by the fact that we don't even hear voices around the world asking us to eliminate our huge arsenal. When I showed you that graph a moment ago and the huge number of weapons owned by the United States, you can see that when we hear about nuclear weapons in this country, we hear about Iran, which isn't on that graph, doesn't have nuclear weapons. Iraq doesn't have nuclear weapons. We hear about North Korea. It has under 10 nuclear weapons, whereas we have thousands of nuclear weapons. And in 1995, 78 countries went to the International Court of Justice pleading with the court to declare nuclear weapons illegal, and citing all kinds of international covenants. Our own country, in a joint statement of the Department of Defense and Department of State, argued that having nuclear weapons, threatening to using them, and using them first does not violate St. Petersburg, Geneva, Hague, the conventions on the ozone layer, or any of the followings. And yet that court case, which went on for months, was not even reported in the United States, showing that once you lose the right of self-defense, you also very much lose your own voice. The other way in which our kind of loss of civic stature is shown is in the fact that we've come to believe that you can't eliminate them. And starting with our mayor and going through to Alan, we keep hearing that of course we can eliminate them. This isn't a hugely difficult problem like solving global warming. You just dismantle them. And we know from the fact that there are so many countries that have these nuclear weapons-free treaties. The whole southern hemisphere is blanketed by countries that have agreed to be nuclear weapons-free. This map shows the countries in red that have nuclear weapons and those that are nuclear weapons-free, and you can see that this is very much a north-south problem. Reports done in Scotland, where they had a recent referendum to separate from England, driven primarily by Scotland's wish to get the 4 Trident submarines out of the Clyde River. Those people made a study of how long it would take, and that our own military has said is an accurate study, showing that certain parts of it, such as the dismantling of the triggers, can be done in a matter of hours, and other parts of it can take months, but it could all be done in between 2 to 4 years. It would take much more time for the United States, since we have a much greater size arsenal, but it certainly is a very doable thing. And the fact that so much of our population believes that you can't do anything is part of the infantilization of the population that has resulted from nuclear weapons. So the specific national covenant that I talk about is our own Constitution, and the way in which, with the invention of nuclear weapons, we've had to eliminate both the constitutional requirement for a congressional declaration of war and the actual meaning of the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, whose true meaning is to say no matter how much injuring power you have whether it's zero or a vast amount, you have to distribute it equally among your whole population in order to hold it within a civil frame. Both these provisions have been eliminated since the start of the invention of atomic weapons. And just looking at the Congressional Declaration of War, and since the invention of atomic weapons, we have not even had an actual legitimate congressional declaration of war, even in the case of conventional war. And the reason for that is presidents think, look, as Nixon said, if I can go into the next room, pick up a telephone, and in 25 minutes, 70 million people will be dead. That's an accurate statement that Nixon made. If presidents think that, why do they think they have to get permission merely to invade Panama or Haiti? So that the senior Bush in the first Gulf War said, I didn't have to get some old goat's permission in Congress in order to kick Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait. And his son, the younger George Bush, said in his State of the Union address in 2004, I pledge that I will never stop and get a permission slip in order to defend this country. Well, that permission slip is crucial because it means you are not, as a population, permitted to injure other populations until you have tested it, until you have put it through two incredibly difficult procedural gates. And in a way that I can talk about at some point where we have more time, if you look very closely at the deliberations for nuclear, for conventional war that we've had in this country, in the 5 cases where we've had a declaration of war, which is the War of 1812, the War of 1846, the Spanish-American War in 1898, and World War I and World War II, and you compare it with the non-deliberation that occurs when our presidents have contemplated using nuclear weapons. And that includes Eisenhower, who contemplated using them in the 1954 Taiwan Straits crisis. Eisenhower again contemplated using them in 1959 in Berlin. Kennedy, we know from Robert McNamara, 3 times, not once, as we think about in Cuba, 3 times came within a hair's breadth of all-out nuclear war. That's quoting Robert McNamara. Lyndon Johnson considered using them to prevent China from getting nuclear weapons. Nixon said he considered using them 4 times, and considering doesn't mean a stray thought. Nixon, for example, sent 18 B-52s loaded with nuclear weapons over Russia towards Vietnam. And the record stops there only because, whereas in the case of congressional deliberation, it's all open and known to the public, in the case of presidential consideration of using nuclear weapons, it's, as Alan said at the end of his talk, completely secret. He should be talking to Alan Roebuck. We as a population ought to be able to demand they talk to Alan Roebuck, but the secrecy of it prevents that. Most important, and I'll just stop there, is the fact that in the presidential deliberation about using nuclear weapons that I look at in some detail in the book Thermonuclear Monarchy, there's no dissent. No one raises any kind of testing of whether the proposition that this population deserves this is true. So thank you.
Questions for Elaine? Comments?
Maybe it's not good form to criticize the host, MIT, but my understanding is MIT still operates Draper Labs. Is that correct? Oh, it's not. Okay. So I don't have to criticize MIT. But around 40 years ago, there was a referendum in Cambridge to ban classified research that would have put Draper Labs out of business. The same resolution passed overwhelmingly in Somerville, but they have no classified research, right? So it was defeated. More money was spent to defeat this resolution per voter than any other in the history of the United States, and it was defeated on civil libertarian grounds. We can't possibly stop classified research. So I'm wondering if we could do that again, get this stuff out of our area.
Okay, I'd like to play the role of somebody who completely disagrees with the people in this room, and I'd like to introduce another metaphor to go with the one that you used in your talk. That of the United States being mainlining a nuclear Jones. Okay, I know I've got to have it, but the Russians are the pusher, and I can't kick the habit until we deal with the pusher. So I've got to stay on the habit. There are a lot of folks out there who think that way. Let me give you a perfect example. I had a brief conversation with one Ben Carson about hair trigger alert. And he said, we're not taking the weapons off hair trigger alert. We need it because of the Russians. So the question becomes how we deal with that and how we deal with that mindset, which I submit prevails in our country.
It does, and just as there's a huge physical architecture with thousands of weapons and then a smaller portion of them, but it's still a large number on hair trigger alert, just as there's that physical architecture, there's a mental architecture in place. And that's one key component of the mental architecture, to think, well, of course we'd want to get rid of it, but these other countries who are more reckless than we are might not want to get rid of it, so we have to keep it, which is, as Alan said a few moments ago, even to have it is self-suicide, so that is not actually an answer. Furthermore, it's slightly morally preposterous for the country that developed them, is the only country to have used them, a country that is testing them every day with its Sequoia computer, one of the largest computers in the world, to talk about how ready they would be if other countries were. I think that we should say we're ready and then ask other countries to come along with us.
If I could just jump in for 1 second. The argument that Ben Carson gave is neglecting our mutual vulnerability. Namely, if the Russian system fails and they fire, we are dead, and vice versa. So, Elaine, I'm going to change it. You've heard me say this privately, but I want to say it publicly. Namely, it's more than nuclear weapons that undermines our Constitution and its method of governance. And it's the whole national security state and all the secrecy that goes around it. And this is a package, and it's been growing. It's true that the leading edge is the nuclear issue. It started during the Manhattan Project and so forth, but it's now graduated to the bigger leagues.
Right. I agree with you. And the only thing that I would add is to say that it starts with the nuclear weapons, and that it can end with the nuclear weapons. Because by disenfranchising the whole population and making everybody feel that whether or not the country takes on the most grave act there is, namely going to war, is just something we should look at on TV rather than we have anything to say about. Once that is gone, that kind of arsenal is gone that brings about that civic injury, the people will regain the stature that will make all kinds of other things, such as the security state, impossible. The idea that this country and its papers belong to a certain small group of men, and the rest of us, it's none of our business, is something that I think will be short-lived. I think that will end pretty quickly after we get rid of nuclear weapons.
I'd just like to say that I view much of this relative to our relationship with Russia, which is the only other major party with nuclear weapons. And we have a very complex relationship with Russia, and generally, if you've seen the picture with Obama and Dmitry, rather dislike of each other as well. And so unless we actually work with Russia and actually somehow work things out, that it's not going to make much difference at this point, because Russia has so many nuclear weapons, but so do we, and so we are on two different sides on a lot of world issues.
Well, we certainly need to work with Russia, and many people would say, let's do unilateral disarmament regardless of what other countries do. I think it's perfectly reasonable to say, let's say we're going to do nuclear disarmament and get other countries to go along with us. And certainly at any point, I mean, Russia has not been in the rear in wanting to disarm. Its population, like the American population, doesn't want to live with the daily threat of annihilation. So, it's the same kind of situation where a small number of people have brought about an architecture that is, simply untenable. And I strongly believe that once countries begin, others will follow, and it can even be a condition of dismantling them. Ophelia.
Hi, Elaine.
Hi.
Thanks for coming. I figured you were the best person to answer this question. How do you think things like racism, xenophobia, et cetera, play into the undemocratic nature of nuclear weapons?
Well, fortunately, there's a book that documents by Vincent and Tandy called African Americans Against the Bomb that shows the kind of incredible part that's been played by African Americans in this country in opposing nuclear weapons, starting at the moment when the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs went off, and the rest of the country was saying, well, I guess it's okay, but African Americans in papers and everything were saying, this is not okay. Why did they say it's not okay? Well, according to many of the leaders who explain this, they saw that it was not okay, both because they have a sense that they know when their civil rights have been violated, and they know that this is a civil rights issue, but also because they knew it was a racist weapon. It was used against other races in Japan, and there's a strong belief that that is the predilection of the nuclear states, to use it against other races.
Thank you.
I wonder if you could put this in the historical context of, compared to the civil rights movement in the 1960s or Gandhi's movement in India, Satyagraha, do we need a mass movement of passive civil disobedience to get the attention of the U.S. government?
I think we do. I mean, clearly we need everything. We need the scientists working, as we heard from Alan and Ira, but we also need the population to come forward and stand there en masse. Even if we can get, as I think through these legal provisions, we can get a court case that says our current military policy is wildly out of line with our Constitution. And I have actually tried to work on such a case, and we got at least a judge to say this might be something the Supreme Court one day has to rule on. But even that legal decision can't really work unless the population remembers that it's their responsibility to speak out about this and to come forward and speak out about it.
Hi, Elaine. Do you think that diverting more government funding to other government programs like Social Security, healthcare, NASA would be a better way to divert funding away from the military-industrial complex?
I mean, I absolutely think, and this is something Jonathan works on a lot and Max works on a lot, I absolutely think that the fact that we pay our taxes but have no say on these weapons is a terrible, grave wrong. I've worked on nuclear weapons for over 25 years, and in that amount of time, I have paid so much tax money, I have actually contributed to nuclear weapons. And that's incredibly painful to me. I can work day and night, I can write my heart out, I can stand and speak again, but I'm putting thousands of dollars into nuclear weapons. How can that be? How can that be okay?
Thank you.
We will come back to that this afternoon.
Yeah.
Last question this morning.
Hi, good to see you again.
Good to see you.
What is, what is the solution to the military-industrial complex? Because people kind of are trapped in this cycle of, do I, work for this company, and then, how do I feed my family if I don't? Wasn't there like a very large educational initiative in the 60s which brought people into STEM research for this purpose?
Yeah, and again, this is something we'll come back to, but the employment does have to be found for all those people at Electric Boat who are making the next generation of Ohio-class submarines, the 12 new Ohio-class submarines that are going to be made. But it's not as though we don't have other things that need to be done. As Richard Rhodes points out in one of his books, the Society of Engineers has shown that in all kinds of infrastructure in the United States, schools, bridges, roads, we're getting grades of C- or D right now. So it's not as though there's not work to be done if we stop making lethal weapons.
We're going to have a last comment. Ira,
Alan, just
Alan,
Do you want this?
to make a last comment before we close the morning panel?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment about the question about budgetary priorities. Obviously, there's a very strong argument to be made to cut the budget on nuclear weapons because of all the other important ways this money should be spent. But I think we have to understand that people are not going to cut the military budget, the nuclear budget, as long as they have the mistaken idea that these weapons protect us. We've seen this over and over again. People will spend whatever it takes for security. And so the critical argument I think that we need to make, in addition to how wasteful this is and how pressing the other needs are, we've got to get people to understand that these weapons do not in any way contribute to our security. And this is a very powerful false notion. I think the thing behind the comment that Ben Carson is supposed to have made, that we need these because the Russians have them and somehow are having these protect us. This is very, very deep in our psychology. And for much of human history, having a bigger weapon actually did make you somewhat safer. If you're walking down a dark alley and some guy's coming at you and he's got a stick and you've got a bigger stick, you're a little bit safer. The problem is that nuclear weapons are categorically, qualitatively different. As Alan pointed out, these are suicide weapons. And that's what we have to get people to understand. These weapons don't protect us. In fact, they are the greatest threat to our safety and security. And once we are able to convince them of that, then I think everything else will flow much more easily.
Alan, last words.
I'd just like to second what Ira said. You can look at history and see whether nuclear weapons were a deterrent. Did nuclear weapons deter Argentina from attacking nuclear-armed Britain in the Malvinas War? No. Did nuclear weapons protect France from the recent terrorist attacks? No. Did they stop the attack on Israel in the Six-Day War when Israel had nuclear weapons? Did they win the Vietnam War for us? Did they win the Afghanistan War for the Russians or for the Americans? When the U.S. was the only nuclear country, did it stop the Soviets from invading Eastern Europe? So there's many examples where you can just show that they haven't deterred anybody. So again, they're more dangerous to have than to not have. There are only 9 countries in the world that have nuclear weapons. How did all the rest of the world decide not to have them? Why did they decide not to have them? What can we learn from that? Some say, one of the pictures showed the countries which are part of NATO or part of some alliance that they feel protected by them. The whole southern hemisphere has no nuclear weapons. Costa Rica got rid of their army, and they're the most productive country in Central America. There are many examples of why it would be beneficial. But like Ira said, people think a bigger bomb is better, but they're completely different, and that's what we have to get into people's heads.
Let's thank our morning panel.